This seminar is obviously concentrating on the engineered stone. And we realize some folks are here who also have other silica type exposures. So what we'll probably do is save some of those questions towards the end and try to handle as much as we can and meet everybody's needs. The agenda has a long stretch of Q&A towards the end. And so if we slide later in this, going over PowerPoint slides and some discussion as we go, we'll be okay. So anybody who's worried about agendas will be all right. And then I think that covers the everything on the structure of this. What we're also going to do is try to, for the first few of the talks, they're very fast types of talks. We probably are going to move right into the meat of it after that without Q&A.
The comment that said that they can't hear.
We're on it.
Okay.
Are they able to hear? Yes. Okay. Did they miss the introduction?
No, we're good.
Good. Okay. Very good. With that, what I think we'll do is we're going to call on each of the people with the presenter so we have an introduction of who's all here, and I'll just go down the list. And Kyle, let's start with you. Kyle.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kyle Naylor, certified industrial hygienist, certified safety professional, and director of health and safety for mining. For the last 15 years or so, I've traveled the world, and respirable crystalline silica is a common hazard that my teams and I have had to address. So I look forward to speaking with you here shortly.
Did we miss that? No, we're okay. All right. The usual getting IT working at the beginning. Sean Castillo. Sean?
Hey, good afternoon.
And do you want to introduce yourself, or I can do that for you?
Yeah, are we ready to go? I'm sorry, I was having trouble hearing at first.
Okay. Yes, we are. We're doing introductions. Do you want to give a 1-minute version of, because we can hear you loud and clear.
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Sean Castillo. I'm one of the certified industrial hygienists over at the Georgia Tech Occupational Safety and Health Administration Consultation Program. And I'll be here today to talk about some of our experiences in Georgia within our consultation program. So a little bit about me, CIH, and our group of 5 industrial hygienists, Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science from Texas A&M University, and I have my Master's of Public Health and Environmental Health from Emory University here in Atlanta. So I'm happy to be here today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation from all the other states as well.
Thanks so much, Sean. Appreciate it. Tyler McGraw.
Hello, my name is Tyler McGraw. I have a CIH and CSP. I assume all of us here presenting do so far. I'm an industrial hygiene consultant for a state fund in California. I have experience in the military as a CIH there, and at Disney and a consultant for multi different firms. I enjoy talking about silica and my experience with the exposure out here in California.
Super. Thanks so much, Tyler. Carla Olson.
Carla Olson, occupational medicine physician here in Salt Lake City, Utah. Also a certified industrial hygienist with practice industrial hygiene before medical school, and have sort of, I guess, the ominous role of sharing personal experience treating patients diagnosed with silicosis after exposure to respirable.
Dr. Harrison, Bob Harrison. They can hear you from that.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Bob Harrison, occupational medicine doctor, UC San Francisco, practice and teach at the medical school. Also work with the California Department of Public Health as a medical officer.
Bob's also been down to Australia. He'll bring in some of these other experiences that will enliven the discussion. Alia Khan, Dr. Khan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alia Khan, and I'm a medical officer in the occupational health branch of the California Department of Public Health, and I'm an occupational medicine physician. I work with Dr. Harrison, and I'm also faculty at UC Irvine. Thanks.
Dr. Khan was recently the residency director down at UC Irvine as well, in her past job. And as a panelist, Jenny, are you on by chance?
I am on the call. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Dr. Jenny Holroyd. I'm a certified industrial hygienist. I work with Sean Castillo, and I am here and I will be monitoring the chat to help answer any questions.
Super. And we also have people here to monitor the chat, so it'll enliven the discussion. And anybody online who doesn't like to speak can just put questions in the chat and we'll catch those too. So that's just dandy. With that, we're through the introductions. Our first speaker is Kyle Naylor, and Kyle, I'll mention he's also come back to get a PhD from us in occupational injury prevention. So when he speaks, we get this, higher level than where I speak. So
You're putting the pressure on. Well, first off, I appreciate the opportunity to present and Dr. Hedman's invitation. As I mentioned before, for about the last 15 years, I've had the opportunity to work across many different industries in different continents, different countries. But one of the most common occupational health exposures that I've seen and that my teams have worked to address has definitely been respirable crystalline silica. So through my presentation, I hope to provide a brief overview of what respirable crystalline silica is, why it matters, and why we need to be focused on these exposure controls. And then at the end, I want to put it into context of also how challenging of a problem this can be, so that we as health and safety professionals, as industry leaders, can work together to address this. So first off, what is silica? Silicon dioxide is the form of this element. I shouldn't say element. This substance. So there's two primary forms of silica. And it's important that we differentiate these. For a certified industrial hygienist, this is a review, right? But there's crystalline silica and amorphous silica. The one that we're worried about is crystalline silica. And a lot of this is due to the fact that it's not soluble and also to its crystalline structure. Whereas amorphous silica, it has a non-crystalline structure, it's slightly more soluble, and the toxicological mechanisms typically don't lead to severe or persistent lung damage that Dr. Hagman's going to cover with us today. It's also important to recognize that for this to be hazardous, it must be respirable. That means it's a small particle that's small enough to be suspended in air and for us to breathe it in and be deposited in our deep lung tissue in the alveoli, which then inhibits respiration, exchange of gases in the deep lungs. So respirable crystalline silica, it's the known cause of silicosis, obviously, and is classified as a group 1 human carcinogen. I just want to point out that it's so common, right? When we're laying on the beach, believe it or not, you're laying in crystalline silica. It all comes down to the size of this material and whether or not it's going to be hazardous and cause issues. Where is it found? Well, believe it or not, silica is one of the most common elements that we have on the surface of the earth. It makes up about 12 to 13% of the Earth's crust. You're going to find it in basically every type of rock that exists. You can see some compounds. Yeah. Sorry. Okay, sandstone, right? 70 and 90%. Things like granite, 20 to 45%. I won't go into all of these, but you can see the focus of this presentation is on engineered stone. Depending on the makeup of that, it can be extremely high as well. For the CIHs real quick, there's 3 types. There's quartz, crystallite, tridymite. For the purposes of this discussion, by far the most important one is quartz. That's the most common form of crystalline silica. Let's talk a little bit about the historical context of silicosis. So the first one to recognize this is really the father of toxicology. Paracelsus was his name. Back in the early 1500s, he described silicosis in Austrian silver miners. We then had Dr. Bernardino Ramazzini. He's known as the father of occupational medicine. He observed this in stone cutters, stone masons. And in his writings, he noted that inhaled splinters of rock was the cause, so fine particle. And then finally, I wanted to mention Dr. Alice Hamilton, who's really a pioneer in occupational medicine and industrial hygiene. And she led studies with the Department of Labor that identified the prevalence of silicosis among granite workers in industry here in the United States. One of the most impactful industrial disasters that occurred, which really increased awareness about the importance of silicosis, was the Gauley Bridge Tunnel, or the Hawks Nest Tunnel disaster that happened in the 1930s. This was a project where they were boring a 3-mile tunnel through a mountain for a hydroelectric project. About 3,000 workers were exposed as a result of the silica exposure from the dust, the rock that had high silica content. Somewhere between, call it 500 and just short of 800 people lost their lives from acute silicosis, meaning that they developed this disease over a short term. Typically, silicosis takes several years to develop, but because of the severity of exposure, it happened very quickly. So that led to different legislation. It led to governments stepping in more than they had ever before, which had never really happened before, beginning the regulatory framework that we see today. Things like OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, MSHA, the Mine Safety and Health Administration, here in the United States, are the regulatory bodies that drive occupational exposure limits and those requirements. But for a minute, I just want to put this into context. When I present this to workers, when I present this to industry leaders, I think it's important to understand some of the context behind why this is challenging, why it's been basically almost 100 years since we first started looking at this through the regulatory lens in the United States, but we're still facing challenges. We're still seeing silicosis. So an example I like to give has to do with a packet of sugar. This packet of sugar has 2.83 grams of sugar in it. You put in your tea, your coffee. Theoretically, if we were to get this packet of sugar, grind it down so it's a little bit finer to the respirable portion, and then we were to aerosolize this in the air today, in this room. It's a pretty big room, right? This little packet of sugar, if we were to aerosolize this, do you think we would be above or below the occupational exposure limit for respirable crystalline silica, according to today's OSHA permissible exposure limit? What are your thoughts?
Above.
Above. Okay, well, let's do the math. If you pull your calculators real quick, room dimensions in meters, it's about 12 by 14.5 by 3 meters. Very rough estimate of the volume. For if you're like me, it's good to know 1 meter is just over a yard, right? And our OSHA PEL is 50 micrograms per cubic meters, or 0.05 milligrams per cubic meter. We do the math, 12 times 14.5 times 3, that gives us a room volume of 522 cubic meters of air. We aerosolize that amount, 2.83 grams. Our exposure would be 5.4 milligrams, or concentration, I should say, 5.4 milligrams per cubic meter of respirable crystalline silica, or in our case, respirable sugar, which, if we consider that, we divide that by our PEL, our permissible exposure limit. This little packet of sugar, or theoretically crystalline silica, is 2 orders of magnitude over 100 times over the permissible exposure limit. Now, considering how prevalent silica is in all these products, whether it's sand, stone, concrete, it puts it in perspective how challenging this can be. So visually, how much respirable crystalline silica is the OSHA permissible exposure limit? We do another exercise here with the permissible exposure limit. Considering cubic meter of air, we consider normal breathing rate for an adult doing moderate work. So we're going to say that we're going to breathe in and out approximately 10,000 liters of air. What it comes down to is about that much material. That's respirable crystalline silica. And that's 500 micrograms visualized against a dime. That's a US 10-cent piece. So appreciate the time. I hope this has provided some context into what crystalline silica is, why respirable crystalline silica causes so many issues. I'll turn it over to Dr. Hegman to get into more of the health effects of that.
So while we pop the slides up,
That's my counter.
you know, I've been in the field of medicine, involved with it now for 40 years. And for a group of workers and a field of the entire field of all workers, but in a group of workers in one industry, this is the most serious problem I've ever seen in terms of proportionately affecting the numbers of workers. So that's one of the reasons why we're having this today. It's something we need to put a pin in so that we have folks who are able to live life normally and also have good jobs and do good work. So, by the way, I don't have a CIA. And I don't have a CSP either. I love it that you guys do, many of you. We are going to almost entirely talk about the fibrosis or silicosis today and the risks of that and how to avoid it. There are other effects of silica, and just have at least mentioned them on one slide. This is evidence for crystalline silica exposure. We can separate both fibrosis and accelerated or progressive massive fibrosis, which Kyle just mentioned, probably the best known example that's ever occurred at Gall Lake Ridge. But progressive massive fibrosis cases are actually occurring in the countertop fabrication industry. And so that's one of the reasons that this is, the severity of this is what it is. It's a serious problem. There is elevated risk of cancer. I will show you one slide on that. There's also susceptibility to infections. In brief, the lungs defense mechanism involves cells, macrophages, which go and clean up the lungs, and they get damaged and destroyed in trying to destroy the silica. Therefore, a person has elevated risk for infections, including tuberculosis. So if they're exposed, they're more likely to actually develop an active infection. There are autoimmune effects. There's some COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and some kidney effects. The graph on the right, you don't need to read it. All you need to know is that on the left are numbers of cases, and on the bottom is the time scale. And over time, going into the 2000s, the number of silicosis cases in the United States dropped a ton. So we made a huge amount of progress over the years in avoiding silicosis. This does not, of course, go up to the current time with this current area we're trying to help with industry on the high end of the curve. Normal physiology is our lungs look like this, and in normal situations, and the little circles are the alveoli, where the oxygen and carbon dioxide is exchanged across a single cell to small blood vessels, capillaries, and that's how we live. We respire. And the larger airways that look kind of like a river flowing through it, that's basically connecting up to the trachea, to the outside world. And that's how we respire and thrive. When silicosis occurs, there's an attempt by the body to get rid of any foreign object, including a silica particle, and the body fails, and the macrophages end up destroying themselves. They release chemicals which damage the lung. This causes a scarring reaction in the lungs, which is basically the fibrosis which occurs. And you can see this slide doesn't look anything like the other one, and you can see that there are not too many places you're going to be exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide. And kind of a classic type of picture is the red rods that you see in here are pieces of crystalline silica. Again, the body's trying to do something about it, but we can't. This is the problem where once the silica is in the body, we do not have a way to get it out. And it accumulates, and there's ultimately a cumulative exposure issue here. I'll show you a graph of that. The silicosis itself is a fibrosis. The chest X-ray on the upper panel is a normal, and the chest X-ray on the bottom is somebody with silicosis. And to most of you, you probably would say it looks the same. It's not, and that's one of the issues is chest X-rays are not the best test there ever was, but they are an indicator. Once you get those findings, though, it's a more advanced case by definition. You didn't just have a little bit of exposure. It took both dose and time to develop. And your lung volumes, if you did a breathing test, a pulmonary function test, a normal is the green dotted line. And these are liters of air. And basically, what you see on the horizontal x-axis goes from 2 liters to 6 liters. So a person's able to take a big breath in and blow it out, and that's the normal curve. When you get a scarred lung, you can already imagine you're not going to expand the lung as much. And so that produces the restrictive lung, which is the blue. You have smaller lung volumes, you can't breathe as much. And the red one, if you want to know, is like the smoker's COPD classic. But here's the dose response cumulatively of my chance of getting silicosis based on a cumulative exposure. And it's pretty much largely a linear dose response relationship for most of that curve. And when a worker, me or someone else that is exposed, initially don't notice anything generally. What typically occurs then is more in the way of shortness of breath, reduced work or exercise tolerance. If they were required to use a respirator, then they suddenly don't want to use the respirator because a respirator causes me more work of breathing, so I can't do as much work. So now I got more exposure because I just took the respirator off. And then problems with oxygenation, labored breathing, and ultimately can lead to death. I mentioned the lung cancer, one slide. It is a class 1 carcinogen by the International Agency, IARC, and pretty much any type of lung cancer can occur. The adenocarcinoma, one of the 4 types, is classic, and there is a multiplicative risk with smoking. People are doing both silica exposure work and smoking. It's not a good combo. Briefly to mention the health program requirements, and this gets into at the end things that can be done. Exposures need to be evaluated. We mentioned the PEL at 50, the written control plan, training education, respirators, respirator questionnaires, surveillance exams, and record keeping. So in summary, for the health effects, crystalline silica indeed causes silicosis. It's a dose-response relationship, with higher dose also leading to faster disease and a higher probability of more disease. Accelerated occurs with very high levels, and there's lag time typically taking years to develop, with the exception of extreme exposures. Physical exams are not very sensitive early on, and by the time symptoms occur, it is typically too late because, of course, you can't get the silica out. So that is the extent of just a brief overview of health effects. And next.
Dr. Hagen, are you talking about diagnostic?
A diagnostic.
You see it in your OEM clinic? Are we ordering a CT? Are we?
Yeah, we're going to get to that.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Thank you for that question. We will get to that. And next, I think, is Tyler, right?
Sean Castillo.
Sean.
And Tyler as well.
Wrong.
Hey, are you still able to hear me all fine?
Yes.
Hear you well. Thank you.
Awesome. Cool. That's great news. All right, so again, thank you everyone for having us. Tyler and I are both going to be talking about our experiences with sampling for crystalline silica in these types of workplaces that we're going to discuss. I am in Georgia, so I'm again located in Atlanta, and all of our sampling is done through our consultation program. As we mentioned earlier in the introductions, my colleague Dr. Jenny Holroyd and also Brandon Philpott are in the chat. And so if you have any questions on anything I'm presenting, please use that chat and they'll be able to answer there. Make sure this turns. Just one brief announcement I wanted to make before, just talking about where we even get this sampling from. Partially in our OSHA consultation program, it's a Department of Labor funded grant that is federally and state funded. And we're given money by the Department of Labor and primarily OSHA to go out to small to medium sized facilities to do this sampling. And so all of our monitoring is actually done by companies that volunteered to have us come out. They requested our use. All of the sampling was done free of charge for those companies, and none of the company names are in here. Other documents, photos, some videos that I'll show y'all throughout this too are done through Department of Labor and sponsored funds with our Susan Harwood grant, where we did engineered stone fabrication. So we're going to show you what some of the equipment actually looks like too, so you can get a good overview. And as always, I'm speaking as myself, Sean Castillo here. So we briefly mentioned this earlier in our introduction to, but these are just other visual understandings of what the exposure limits look like in person. And so when you see these dust clouds, if you're walking the street and there's construction, we're really looking at the fine material that's we can't even see within it. And so if we're looking at our occupational exposure limits for silica, which are 50 micrograms per meter cubed for the whole standard, or 25 micrograms per meter cubed for the action level, it is a very fine amount. So it doesn't take a lot. And that's why we're using our water tools and our vacuum tools and everything like that. But it's a good visual indication that one of our colleagues was able to document that they were able to make. And so really what we're talking about today, though, is how does this relate to engineered stone fabrication? And so we do a lot of work, too, with silica within construction. And that's kind of easy to think about in terms of drilling and sawing on concrete and those things. But how does this relate more in general industry and a lot of the products that we get out? And so essentially what engineered stone is, just again as a reminder, is it is called by many names. It could be quartzite, engineered stone, artificial stone. But essentially what happens is rock is taken from quarries that is higher percentage of silica, and it's put together with different adhesives, resins, and it's essentially heat treated, pressure treatment. And what ends up happening from that pulled stone from those quarries is it's made into nice slabs. So once those slabs are taken, they then go to a fabrication site where now you're doing polishing on all of the edges, on all the corners. Now you're routing out sinkholes. You're making quick cuts to be later on in a facility.
How's the what?
And so that is what we're talking about here. One thing I do want to mention, and the reason why we're putting such an emphasis on engineered stone again, is because the way that it's created inherently has more respirable crystalline silica than some of the other known stones. So engineered stone can have up to 40 to 95% respirable crystalline silica. Again, it really depends on how it was created. Whereas some of the more natural stones like granite or marble can also have less amounts of crystalline silica. And so this leads to a further discussion than we have time for today, but this is a good discussion to have about what are the work orders being done? What is the public demand for these type of stones? In the area, is a facility doing more quartz? Are they doing more artificial? Do they have marble mixed in on certain days? What are those production schedules like? Because then you could have variation in some of those exposures. But just anecdotally from Georgia, we are seeing a pretty high uptake in artificial stone. I wanted to throw this image of a safety data sheet of these type of stones just so people also have a good idea of what it looks like when you get it from a manufacturer to make. Just like all of your hazardous chemicals, these do contain hazard communication labeling, and with that comes safety data sheets. And so a couple of things I want to highlight here is first, even in the hazard ID, it kind of talks about what these stones are, right? They're natural coarse, resins, and other occurring materials all put together. When these stones are made and when they're installed in a facility, they're great, right? They're non-flammable. They're easier to clean because they're non-porous. The issue is whenever we have our cutting, sawing, or manipulating these stones, and that's where those workers are being exposed. And then the other thing we really wanted to highlight in this as well is once you look at the composition and ingredients of these slabs. And so you can see right here for this specific stone, crystalline silica as quartz is over 90%, right? And so we know that this is a inherently higher silica containing material than something like a marble or a granite. Now, if you look further in here, now we have all of our constituents from 0 to 10%. And one thing to think about is that the cristobalite, as you can see down here, that is a type of crystalline silica. It's just not named quartz. And so this says above 90, depending on what our range of cristobalite 2 is, that could be a higher range of riskable crystalline silica. So that's where we're starting to get those numbers. But we want to make sure all of our employees are well versed in how to read these hazard communication labeling as well. So this is a quick video of just what these type of facilities look like. So these are the nice, very visually aesthetic countertops. You can see that they all have different types of cuts in them for sinks. They're all fit to size depending on a job. And not every single site that we go to is created equally. Some are larger, some are smaller. And so you might have support staff or people using CNC machines, which we're going to show you next to where some of our polishing is done. They don't all look like this. This slide right here is information generated through our consultation program. So these are samples that our team has taken from November of 2017 through July of 2023. This is actually information that we were able to publish. And so if you want to read more about our paper, we'll have some links at the end, and my colleagues can help put this information in the chat too for you to take a further look. All of our sampling is done in the state of Georgia throughout our free consultation program. In this time, we were able to go visit 11 companies. We did 17 sampling visits, and we were able to do a total number of 77 employees monitored. Within that 77, 75 were full shift, which means, it can mean we take multiple samples, but it's a good indication of their entire day. 2 were half shift sampling just based on what the workload was that day and all we could do. Within this, we also sample for respirable dust and crystalline silica. And in our program, we always compare to the permissible exposure limit and the action. So in our paper, we get more into the data, more time than we have today, but if you have questions. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. We were able to do Bayesian, Bayesian statistics. We do our BDA. We do everything through Expo Stats, at least for this program. And what I wanted to highlight and just show in some graphical information is the amount of data points that are above the occupational exposure limit. And so what we find is a lot of our samples, even with water-fed tools, have been over the OSHA permissible exposure limit. We're also above the action limit. And as we know, once you're over those permissible exposure limits, that's where we are required to wear respiratory protection. And in California, it goes a little even stronger than what we do in the federal OSHA here in Georgia. What I also want to highlight in this image is our 95th percentile using BDA. And so in this case, we have a credible interval 418 and 935 of where our 95% interval is. And so that means on a variation of samples and a variation of our actual visits, we could see exposures getting up to this very, very high exposure. And it's dependent on a lot of factors on site. So in our actual sampling, for 65 employees who exclusively use wet methods. So that means they actually have water-fed tools while they're doing this work. we still had 51 who had exposures above the Pell, and sometimes reaching as high as 370 micrograms per meter cubed. And as we know, the exposure limit, the Pell, is 50. And then with that being said, too, we had 70 who were above the action level of 25, which is half that value. We also want to highlight that at least in Georgia, it's not always a huge difference between small or large fabricators. A lot of times people think that the larger fabricators might have all the tools, they'll have lower exposures, but in our case, that wasn't the same. For our small fabricators, we worked with 6 companies doing 8 visits, and we saw an exposure range of anywhere from 9.2 micrograms to 370, where 50% were over the Pell and 75% were the action level. And on the other hand, with our large fabricators, we worked with 5 companies, did 9 visits, and we saw an exposure range from non-detect from our lab that we work with to 5,100 micrograms per meter cubed, which is a very strong overexposure. But the percentages of over the Pell and over the action level are almost the same in that case. So in our paper and kind of how we do this throughout Georgia, we look at our workers of who we sample in 4 different categories. So one is the support workers, and this is what you'll see in a lot of facilities. These are the people who are doing material handling. They're working on forklifts. They're moving slabs with cranes throughout the facility. And it's not always the case where you can just generate these people as not going to have exposure. Because a lot of times in these facilities, if you ever are able to go out, you'll see the polishers right next to the support workers, next to the CNC machines. Sometimes there's small little facilities where everyone's just working together in a confined area. Our second SEG, which we looked at, were employees operating or programming automated machines. So these are things like your CNC routers, your water jets. And so what these are the tools where you feasibly put the slab down, you're able to set it up through a machine and a computer, and technically you can walk away and do anything that you need to do. And so these are what those machines look like. And you can see that they should have a constant flow of water. However, even with water, there is still dust that is coming out of all of these. So silica is still present while we're doing these machines, even with wet methods, and that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And it's also important to know that even when you're using wet, the slurry still has to go somewhere. So this water dries, there's silica being included. I'm not going to go too deep into it because we're going to talk about the hierarchy of controls as we go through with some of our other presenters, but that is something to keep in mind. Our other SEGs are our small tool operators. So these are the ones using grinders, polishers, meter saws, and circular saws. And these are what those handheld tools look like. So this is what we've seen in facilities where if they're doing it dry. And this is where you can see where all of that silica dust is just going out into the atmosphere. And this is with the dry tool. So not supposed to be how it's done. We did a mock for this case. And this is what it's supposed to look like when it's wet. And so now we have a continuous flow of water being fled onto the actual operation. And even with this, again, we have seen wet tools being used where they're still overexposed to the OSHA regulations. Other important things to think about are how silica dust and water can clog the respirators, especially as they dry over time. And so even with water flowing everywhere, again, there are additional considerations. We're going to talk about some of the ventilation controls using air scrubbers, not doing dry sweeping, keeping everything wet, but I won't steal anyone's shine as we go forward. The last thing I wanted to mention from our exposure control groups is the dry fabrication and lamination. And so this is the last exposure that we have grouped where we see employers doing things dry, especially in something called lamination. And so what lamination is where you're taking multiple slabs or multiple pieces together, and it's a finishing process where now you're using an adhesive to cure. And what we've been told by companies is during this curing time, this adhesive has to dry. And now if they have to do any kind of work, they're not allowed to keep that wet. And so even though this is a short amount of time, we are still seeing higher exposures during this just due to the nature. And so this is a conversation where, you know, we've always thought about having with companies on, is there a way that this can get scheduled to where while you're doing a curing process, can this stone be stored away to be worked on later once it's fully cured so that you can start using those wet tools? These are just some examples of some things we see on site where we are not using our wet methods. On the right, we have a cabinet that's not even open to pull dust in, and you can see all of the settled dust around. So again, they have respirators, but this is something that we should be doing wet. This is an example of a facility where we went out to where now they have a water curtain. And so we're actually seeing that dust being pulled out as that water is being placed through that machine. The last example, and then I'll take a break because it will be Tyler's turn, is we want to make sure that we're also not using compressed air. And these are some of the things that we see here in Georgia. And so you can see this compressed air line is basically just resuspending all of these settled particulates. And so that's a really important part about how we want to make sure that we're doing our daily cleaning. Because if someone does take an air compressed line out there, then we're not going to have as much that's suspended in this case. We're going to talk about the hierarchy controls as we move through today. Also the challenges, so I'm not going to go over anyone else's presentations, but just wanted to make sure in Georgia, some of our key points is what we've seen, at least here through our consultation program, is wet methods aren't always effectively reducing exposures below the OSHA occupational limit, and where employees are still needing to wear respirators just based on the exposure we're getting from our sampling. So we'll put our contact information in here. I went over my time, so we'll be here in the Q&A portion as well. But if you're interested in our most recent publication, we'll make sure to put that in the chat. And with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing so that Tyler can share his as well. So thank you, everyone.
Sean, great slides, great video. Thank you. Any questions for Sean while we switch over to Tyler?
Not necessarily a question, just a comment. The statistics showing how much or how ineffective water methods are is what is concerning.
Any further on that, Sean? Is there any, I don't know, is there any other option? Or is it just is what it is?
So again, I don't want to get too into what other people may say, but we talked about just with the wet controls. There are some research coming out about using it in conjunction with things like local exhaust ventilation too, where not only do you just have a water-fed tool, but now you have the local exhaust, you know, the black little hose that you can move around throughout the work. We've seen places that have dust collection systems too that are fixed in place. And so one of the recommendations we have is that every slab can be on a turnable table. So you always position yourself away from where that dust is being pulled in conjunction with wet methods. We've seen some work come out about how people are able to rig a PVC pipe on a slab and also have a constant flow of water because they've drilled holes into a PVC pipe and a hose and it's flowing on the slab while they also have a water-fed device. So with that being said, sometimes if you're doing all those things and you're still overexposed, then hierarchy of controls, we're still having to wear respiratory protection. Here on the federal sense, there isn't that PAPR standard, which we have in other states. So I'll let others talk about what that may be too.
Okay. Thank you. With that, we'll take more questions, obviously, in the questioning phase. Tyler, are you ready to go? We have your slides up.
Yes, I'm ready to go. I'm going to start. If you can't see my slides, let me go or let me know and we'll go from there. Hello, my name is Tyler McGraw. I'm a CHCSP. I'm industrial hygiene consultant here for State Compensation Insurance Fund. I'm here to talk about the takeaways from the field with Respo and Silica and countertop fabrication out here in California. So just going through some of my slides, I'm going to talk about the silicosis surveillance out here in California. I'm going to talk about how State Compensation Insurance Fund is helping policyholders. I'm going to talk about what we see in the field. I'm going to go over a little about hierarchies of controls that we see in the fields and what we see that's useful. So a little bit of how this started, how this accumulated. We've keeping track of silicosis cases out here in California, not State Compensation Occurrence Fund, but CDPH is. I'm sure they'll talk about it more in later slides. But engineered stone started making its case roughly appearing on the market about 15 years ago, and silicosis takes roughly about 15 years for it to affect someone working on it. And you can see this pattern follows about that. That's why there has been an explosion of cases lately, is because it follows the timeline. It's kind of like asbestos. It's not going to affect you today, tomorrow, but 20 years down the line, it'll affect you. It's the same thing with silica when you're working on countertops. So what do we do at State Fund? How do we help our policyholders? We have an outreach program, and we go over the new California regulations with our policyholders. We talk about what's required. As you can see here, we have certain items in red where we go over a checklist with them. And those are the items that if CalOSHA comes on, they can shut you down. Some example of those is if you don't have wet methods, or if you don't have respiratory protection PAPRs is required out here in California. If you don't have those, then they could shut you down. And then this is something I want to talk about with our data coming up is we perform silica air sampling for these policyholders after they have met the requirements of this checklist. So our data is a little bit skewed because we're not doing every countertop policyholder that we have. We're doing ones that have wet methods. We're doing ones that have PAPRs, one that's have more clean shop, that have requirements, ones that are meeting more of the standards, and they're more likely to have less exposure than most. So what do we see in the field? We conducted sampling from roughly February 23 to December 25. We've done 25 sampling visits. We monitored 91 employees in the field, and the total number of employees under action level is 56. The total number above the action level but under the Pell is 20, and the total number of employees above the Pell is 50. And our regulations out here are the same as federal. The action level is 25 micrograms and the Pell is 50. Now, if we were to represent this data, who doesn't love pie graphs, but it always helped me understand things a little bit looking at Pac-Mans, is looking at all silica exposures for all type of countertops that are used. This is about what it looks like on the chart with the numbers earlier. We have little about 60 some percent that are under the action level, and then above the action level in Pell, you can see that's roughly almost 40%. But one thing I want to note and taken out, I'll explain it more in the hierarchy controls a little better, is when we take out a lot of the slabs and we just focus on engineering stone, the level of over the Pell is increased. The level of people not exposed under the action level, that is decreased. So certain countertops like porcelain, for example, we haven't gotten a detectable level of silica when we monitor for porcelain. But when engineered stone, we're highly more likely to experience numbers over the action level and numbers over the Pell. So some of the lessons learned. It's basic. The higher percentage of silica in the countertop usually equals higher exposure. Again, I'm going to beat this in as much as I can. Engineered stone, there's a lot higher percentage of silica, so you're more likely to have a higher overexposure than you are to something like granite or porcelain. The maximum water use. So it's not just that they use water, it's about how much water they use. I'll show a little bit of that with the different tools that are usable later on. And then good housekeeping is another thing to keep in mind. So if policyholders clean up after they cut a slab, and there's not dust everywhere, less likely to get up. They have a lot less exposures as typical methods. And then another thing I want to mention and bring on is drying methods before epoxy use. So not all epoxies, but most epoxies have to be completely dry. And so one way polyfillers have accomplished this is they use compressed air. Keep in mind, they only use compressed air for roughly 2 to 5 minutes to dry the slab where they can use epoxy. And just that limited number of time using compressed air, these are usually the guys that are being overexposed with laminators. And there are other methods that are possible around this. Torch blowing to dry it, where you basically blow a torch. It has its own hazards to introduce. Keep that in mind. Other methods is squeegeeing it down or using acetone to help dry the air. Or something that I've started to see more recently is some epoxies can be applied a little wet, where they don't have to be completely dry. And with this, their policyholders' numbers have been reduced. I'm going to go over the hierarchy controls and the different things. And number one thing that everyone loves is elimination, but we're working on countertops. They all have a portion in it, so that's not possible. But what is possible is substitution. One thing I wanted to mention, the engineering stone, it ranges from 40 to 95%, but in the field, usually they're a lot higher. They're usually in the high 80s to low 90s percentile. Some newer types of engineering stone are a lot lower, where they're reaching 40, and the less silica in the air, the less silica in the stone, the less silica becomes in the air. And you see the porcelain percent, about 14 to 18%. It's something I want to reiterate about the pie graph that I saw earlier. When we had porcelain in there, I haven't seen exposure that's been detectable level amount of silica in the air. This is an SDS. I just want to reiterate when we're talking about engineered stone, this one's 87%. They're usually about this high in the field, but some new products, they are becoming to be lower as more of this becomes to be a problem and known throughout. When we talk about wet methods and engineering stone, you see a polisher with the wet method over here on the right. You see a circular saw in the middle with a water attachment. And then an angle grinder over here on the right. This is an angle grinder where it's a water incorporated tool. So it came like this from the manufacturer. There are angle grinders that have aftermarket tools where you can attach wet method to them. Those we've seen, they're better than cutting dry, but they're not as effective as the water tools that become integrated into this. And one thing I do want to reiterate and keep in mind is you should not modify the tool in any way to remove the safety and controls guards within the tools itself, because you don't want to fix one problem to create another problem. This is another wet method we've seen a little bit in the field. It completely wet sheets the countertop. It's simple as attaching a hose with a PVC pipe and drilling holes in it. That way, if you use this in combination with the other wet tools, less likely to get silica in the air, and then less likely to be exposed to the silica. That's the whole game, is getting your percentage down of silica in the air to reduce it. And we are using wet methods instead of using fresh water from the fountain every time. A lot of places like to recycle the water that's used, recirculate it. And then one thing to keep in mind with the filtration systems is you want to remove the silica from it, because if you're using water with the high silica content in itself, again, you're likely to reproduce silica in the air, more likely to be exposed to it. So we want to make sure that these filtering systems are maintained and that silica is removed from it. I guess I, like everyone else, likes to bring up coins and then how much little silica content is needed in the area. I showed you here. And this is when I talk about housekeeping. As you can see here through the dusty areas, when you walk through here, you're going to kick up the dust. And if you see, or you can see your footprints, just keep in mind of how little amount is needed in the air to be overexposure. That's with the reference here with the coin with the little amount of dust on Lincoln's head here. So shops that have a lower exposure limits, they usually look something more like this, where you don't see dust on the floor. The floor looks wet. You can't see it. It's not given a chance to kick up dust when you're walking through it. So some administrative controls I want to talk about. Employees sometimes they like to have their lunch breaks in the work area. They need their own lunchroom for housekeeping because you're taking off all your respiratory equipment when you're heating food. You don't want to use a microwave in the workshop because it has a high chance of being overexposed, and then you're not wearing any respiratory protection. You're being more exposed to it. You want to keep in mind signs and a language that your employees can understand because you want to know what the harmful areas is. It's not everywhere in the entire facility, but it's in the shops. You don't want to have these signs, people worried in the lunchroom, but you want to make employees aware of what can be wrong. Same thing about training your employees. Not every employee knows that silicon is hazardous. They don't know the symptoms of it. They don't fully understand the controls that can be used. This is something you want to train with your employees, then also offer medical surveillance because like anything in life, the earlier you catch something, the better you have a chance of fighting it and protecting yourself against. This is one thing I want to bring up about the poster for this conference. As you can see, this guy cutting a countertop. And two things I want to point out. He's wearing no respiratory protection and he has a pretty good goatee going on. And like most guys, even myself, I don't like to shave every day. Yeah, I sometimes have a little bit of a stubble. And when you have stuff like that, respirators they're not useful. It's kind of like just wearing an expensive headpiece for no reason. That's one of the reasons PAPRs are required and they help produce it, especially loose fitting PAPRs, as where they put the hood over yourself and then it blows air out. It's less likely a chance of being exposed to silica, even if there is some methods with silica in the air. The air blows silica out away from you. You're less likely to be exposed to it. These use of these type of PAPRs, they become ineffective. One thing I want to keep in mind, I want to drill into everybody, silicosis is preventable. It's 100% preventable if we use the right techniques, the right type of protection, and then reducing the percentage of silica that we use in our products. All right, that's all I have. Thank you. Any questions?
Very informative.
Ooh, excellent back-to-back talks, coordinated across the country. Meeting each other. What we're going to do next is more of an emphasis on the workers. So Dr. Olson called me about this about 8 months ago, something like that. So that's why she's, you'll hear it firsthand. Thank you, Dr. Olson.
Absolutely. I'll speak as loud as I can here so you can hear me. I know we're already about 20 minutes behind schedule, so we're good. We're good. Okay, excellent. I won't. I'm not worried about that then. Happy to be here today, and I think my role today is really to use my own clinical experience to sound an alarm. I feel exactly the way Kirk does when he talked about in my clinical experience in the last 20 years of occupational medicine, I've never seen a more concerning, and I'm going to use the word epidemic, a more concerning epidemic than what I just saw in the last 12 months. And that being said, I have treated literally thousands of patients in the past 20 years, all with different types of occupational injuries and occupational exposures. So I'm using that as a method of alarm or a method of really trying to lend my voice to the resources of activating our own our medical folks, our safety folks in the workplace, our employers who are in the role of safety and health, our employees who really need all the appropriate information and education. One thing I will highlight as well, my experience in the cases I'm going to present today highlights a problem that they're tackling in California, perhaps better than we're doing now in Utah. We could really follow their example. The surveillance data of some of these cases in California are being tracked very scrupulously, and it's been impressive for me to watch the dashboard in California's Department of Health and the resources that they have really worked very quickly to deliver to the public and to employees, and I'll touch on a few of those. My daughter is actually a public health student at BYU. She's put together some resources both in Spanish and English in front on the table. They're mostly from the California references, a couple of business cards with QR codes that you can reference, multiple websites, multiple PDF files that would really be helpful for you, and a few USB drives there's only a limited number for those who want to take those to have the reference in that hard copy version. So let me, using that background, that context, let me just explain what I've seen in the last year. So beginning in early 2025, I began seeing several employees who came to me in my clinic for their surveillance exams for respirator use, all from one countertop manufacturing facility in the area. So we didn't get any advance notice in my clinic that they were coming for anything in particular other than they were there for their respirator exams. So you can imagine if you're a provider, if you're a physician, you're walking into a room, you have in front of you a chart with a pulmonary function test that is abnormal. What I do is I say to my staff, repeat the PFT. You must have not done the PFT right, because this couldn't be correct. This is far more abnormal than we would anticipate in a healthy middle-aged employee. You repeat the PFT and it is the same or worse. And then you wonder what's going on and you begin interviewing the patient. And that was really the scenario that began to play out that alarmed us to the fact that these employees that were coming in for their respirator exams, this was more, we were seeing obviously more than just a typical surveillance exam. So over the course of a couple months, I saw 13 employees from the same engineered stone company. And remind you, this is one company, and these were patients who were just being sent in for their surveillance exams, not because they reported symptoms necessarily, or because they reported an abnormal exposure. Of those 13, 5 went on to have confirmed silicosis from exam findings, pulmonary function tests, x-rays, and then high resolution CTs. Their occupational history is purely engineered stone, purely stone fabrication. None of these employees had any other occupational history that would have lent themselves to silicosis. So again, remember, this is one shop, 50 employees in the Wasatch Front only, not symptom-driven visits, but these are respirator exams. So we've talked about silica risks already. I'm not going to go over that, but I wanted you to recognize that this is an uptick. This is not just countertops being manufactured in the same rate as they have since we began using granite and stone countertops in our kitchens. The use of engineered stone is a dramatic uptick. It's a cheaper stone. It provides customization for customers that they like better than some of the natural stone. And when we talk about the hierarchy of controls, we can promote substitution in this situation. We can promote elimination with wise consumer usage. So this goes beyond just a health risk. It's so interesting for me to note, and we'll hear a little bit, I think, from Bob perhaps, of the experience happening in Australia. But engineered stone is prohibited in Australia. You do not see the numbers of respiratory silica and silicosis in this industry in that. And so it's a perfect case study, one that we really need to replicate in the United States. So again, a local company, approximately 50 employees. This plays out just like a perfect epidemiological study. And I want to, this is another element that I really want to hit very hard. Of those 13 employees that I saw in my clinic, what percentage of them do you think English was their first language? Zero. Of the 5 that had confirmed silicosis, their English speaking skills were extremely limited. And so these are all, in this setting, they're all Spanish speakers. And we have to be very careful with how we educate a population who does not use English or does not use the same language as their healthcare providers for their primary language. So all of the employees in this setting were Spanish speaking only. All of them had greater than 20 years of marble and granite fabrication installation experience. Some even more than that. The youngest person diagnosed with silicosis in this case was 44 years old. So we're still seeing young people. This is not just exposure from 20 and 30 years ago. This is some of these people have had more profound and even more acute exposure, still causing disease. The employees in this company reported very limited or none or no respirator usage early on as the company began doing granite fabrication or interstitial fabrication, but noted increased vigilance in respirators in the recent years. They also report massive amounts of dust in their fabrication areas. They talk about changing their baseball caps every day that they go in, because when they come home, their cap is so covered in dust that they can't even shake the dust out. When you think about the levels, the small amount of respiratable silica that we see that beats the PEL, can you imagine having that much dust on a baseball cap and taking it home with you and trying to shake it off to remove that dust? So 3 of the employees early on reported pulmonary symptoms to their primary care provider. So they were reporting symptoms outside of a workers' comp, outside of a work-related evaluation to their primary care providers in the prior year, just because they were experiencing dyspnea, just because they were experiencing shortness of breath. They complained to their PCPs, their primary care providers, of that shortness of breath, difficulty doing just normal tasks. Interestingly enough, one of the patients that I saw, so I'm seeing these patients as a surveillance exam, right? But as soon as their symptoms correlate with silicosis or a disease caused by a work-related exposure, then I'm also beginning their treatment for a work-related illness. And at that point in time, I'm also advocating for avoidance of exposure, et cetera, while we help them get in to see a pulmonologist. One of the patients reported to me that we put him on light duty so that with regards to respirator use, right? So that he was not around respirable silica. He was not supposed to be in any of the fabrication environments. He came back before he was able to see the pulmonologist, and he reported to me, he said, they still put me out in the luxury homes that were installing these stones, these beautiful countertops, and I'm walking up and down stairs carrying these heavy countertops. No, I'm not being exposed to silica in a fabrication sense, but I physically am short of breath walking up and down stairs carrying countertop. I need additional restrictions. So think about that their metabolic ability is dramatically reduced because they just can't breathe. And so think about the fact that they're impacted not only in their respiratory system, but they just don't have the metabolic ability, equivalence to be able to do even normal tasks like walking up and down the stairs. And okay, perfect. So I wanted to show, there is a brief little slide here on an abnormal PFT. You've already seen an example of a PFT. You'll see this is a pretty dramatic restriction in pulmonary restriction in one of our patients. These are 3 X-rays of the patients that I saw, 3 of the patients that I saw in the clinic. It's really evident immediately that you can see the massive pulmonary fibrosis in the lungs of these patients. Now, these are people that are just barely receiving a diagnosis of silicosis, never before treated for this illness. So it's remarkable how progressed this disease is, even as they're just being diagnosed, even as their treatment is just beginning. Couple thoughts here with regards to engineered stone and Spanish speakers. We have a gap in the state of Utah understanding how much what our numbers are with regards to persons who work in this industry, and how many of them are Spanish speaking, how many of them don't have English skills or English speaking skills. We know that engineered stone is a growing sector in the U.S. We know that there's rapid expansion in the last decade, and many of those workers, as we see in California, are immigrant or Spanish speaking, often in small shops with limited protections. Why this matters? It's a terrible combination. It's a perfect storm. You have high silica material, you have poor controls. We've seen that you can't use controls good enough. Wet methods are not good enough. And then you combine that with a vulnerable workforce who does not have a great communication opportunity. It creates a perfect exposure or perfect storm for exposure. So my call to action for employers, we really want to communicate the possibility and the encouragement of implementing any and all methods that reduce exposure. Wet methods, local exhaust ventilation, and effective respiratory protection programs. For our public health and regulator friends, this sector needs to have investigation, needs to have a priority. We ought to consider targeted surveillance of some of the engineered stone shops. I know our Utah OSHA is out there looking at these shops. We need to collect Utah-specific data on workforce size and the language needs of those employees. And for clinicians, ask about engineered stone work, even if you have a healthy employee. If they work in a countertop manufacturing facility, the likelihood is they have exposure to respirable silica. Consider early high-resolution CT and spirometry in exposed workers, even if they're young and minimally symptomatic. Just an article on silicosis in migrant workers. I can't emphasize enough how important it is for us as a public sector to mitigate the risk for our Spanish-speaking friends and colleagues and community members. I'm going to skip past some of these exam protocols. Please feel free to chat with me if you have questions with regards to exam protocols that we implement in our clinic. For Spanish-speaking patients, often they will walk into your clinic and they will try their best to let you believe that they speak English. They don't want to be the patient who doesn't speak English. So you hand them an English form and they're going to read through it and they're going to check no on every one of those answers. And so we're going to underdiagnose disease in those populations that are vulnerable. Please, with anyone who uses Spanish or other languages as their primary language, please make an effort to give them both education information and occupational history forms in their language. And with that, any questions at all? We can take questions later, or
Well, I think we'll take questions later. I'm going to ask you for one anecdote. I don't know if you remember, because you told me this, and it's like it was yesterday. You told me about somebody who only wanted to work 3 more years. You remember?
Yes.
Do you want to tell them that story?
Yes. So there's a gentleman whose response to me, I said, you can't. This was one of the chest x-rays you just saw in this presentation. I went back into the room after looking at his chest x-ray and reviewing his pulmonary function test and his history. And I said, you can't ever work around silicosis again. And he said, I just need 3 more years, just 3 more years. I already have my home in Mexico. I just need to work 3 more years and I can retire. And I had to say to him, I said, if you continue to work with silica, you will not live for 3 more years. You won't live to see that home in Mexico. And that's the reality of it. That is really the accurate story. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Carla.
Yeah.
It's just fabulous. We're gonna luckily I put the surveillance stuff in the beginning with my talk, so we're gonna actually move now to Bob Harrison, who we're thankful came to speak with us, California. Thanks.
I'm your emissary from California. Great to be here. I'm going to share this presentation with my colleague, Alia Khan from the California Department of Public Health, who's going to follow. She's virtual. I'm here. I'm real. So January 9th, 2019. It's been 7 years exactly to the day when Jennifer Flattery, who's an epidemiologist who I work with in my department, walked over to my office and said, Bob, we found a 32-year-old who was discharged from a hospital in California with silicosis. It's literally been 7 years since the first index case in California. We investigated that individual's hospital discharge, got his records, and we tracked down his brother. And I'll never forget the day I called his brother on the telephone from my office, Spanish speaking. And he said, that worker, my brother, had already died of silicosis. And not only that, my other brother also died in an emergency room. And the doctors told me he had stone in his lungs. That's the way it had been translated to me from Spanish. After investigating both of those deaths, we confirmed that they had both died. Two brothers working for the same employer of progressive massive fibrosis, accelerated silicosis. So this is not simple silicosis. This is not simple silicosis, and this is not a simple problem to solve about what we do about this. So it's really ironic that I've come here and it's 7 years to the day. I'm really excited to be here, but I'm also really depressed because this is still going on. And I feel to some extent that I have failed because I saw this coming. I saw this epidemic on the horizon when I read the first journal article in Chest, a pulmonary journal, eminent journal from Israel that was published in 2012. And it had 25 cases of workers from Israel who were transplanted in an Israeli advanced medical center. The very first case that was presented in that series was actually in 2007. So my goal, honestly, is to have a day when we walk into Home Depot or other big box stores or your tile and sales showroom, and we can buy other than this. This is all high crystalline silica containing artificial stone. Many different manufacturers make this. There's now over 100 worldwide. It's a very profitable business for manufacturers. Let me be clear what this is made of, because it took me 10 years to come to this realization and understanding. This is made of fine silica flour. This is not kind of crushed rock in some aggregate. This is not the sand on the beach. This is fine silica flour with a particle size of anywhere from 20 to 200 microns, depending on the specs from the manufacturer. Mixed with polyester resin, made into a cookie dough-like material and pressed under high temperature and pressure into molds. There's probably 1 billion pounds of silica flour sold worldwide in artificial stone. It was invented in the mid-1970s by an Italian engineer, Marcello Toncelli, who worked for a company called Breton, who makes the manufacturing equipment that are purchased by manufacturers. There's now 2 other Chinese manufacturers who are making the equipment. which is why there's a proliferation of these manufacturers in China and India and Southeast Asia. It's a pretty simple process to make this, honestly. I mean, it's pretty, you take 300 pounds of silica flour, you mix it with some amount of polyester resin, you put it in a mold, you put it under pressure, and you put in some pigment and you get the nice surface characteristics. So my goal is to have a day when I walk into Home Depots or other shops around the United States, and there's a safer product. Oh, there's actually, I wanted to prove to you on January 9th, that was the email that I got. This is occupational medicine, by the way. This is why I love my field. This was my aha moment. I was waiting for this. And here I've been working with our hospital discharge data, and I found out, sorry, he's 37-year-old. And I knew right away, why am I getting a 37-year-old with silicosis? I'd never seen it before in my career. And you know, this was the story. He was employed at a stone fabrication shop. He was diagnosed with silicosis in 2013. And Carl, you mentioned that 3 of your cases had been talking to their primary care provider. That's what happened here. You know, he'd been diagnosed in 2013. He got worse and worse and worse. By the time we found him in our hospital discharge record in January 2019, he had already been ineligible for a lung transplant. So he died. And why I never heard about him in 2013? You know, this is why we need a much better reporting system in California and in the United States. So I ask, you know, like we need to work with our primary care colleagues, or obviously, to, if you see something, as I say, if you see something, say something. Report it to somebody. Let somebody know. Because wouldn't you think if there was one case in 2013, there might be other workers in that same workshop, in that same shop? Wouldn't you like, okay, can you synapse, please, that there's something more than just that one case? You know, so we've been talking and educating for years about this. He had advanced silicosis. We published these two brothers, plus several other cases from that same employer after we did screening, similar to what you've done here in Utah. And at the same time, these cases were emerging in Colorado, Texas, and Washington. So we have 18 cases that we published in September of 2019. So what happens in March of 2020? If everybody remembers, COVID, right? Okay, COVID hits. So our OSHA inspectors had gone out in 2019 and done about 100 inspections in these shops in California. I referred my colleagues and I referred this particular employer to OSHA. They did a very thorough inspection. They fined that employer $800,000, which at that time was the largest fine ever issued against one of these shops. After a couple of years, it was negotiated down to half that amount. This employer is now gone out of business in one of their locations. It's a lot of turnover in this industry. And we published the results of that sampling, very similar to what we heard from our colleague at our California State Compensation Insurance Fund. About half of the shops were over the action limit or the permissible exposure level. Half of them were really dusty. COVID hit, and we stopped really paying much attention to this in terms of our surveillance and our outreach and education and enforcement work. And then Jane Fazio, a pulmonary doc at UCLA, runs into us at a medical conference. We had a poster, and Jane said, I got 25 cases in my practice. Sorry, I have 25 cases in my practice. Young guys with silicosis from the Los Angeles area. They're in my practice. I'm at a county hospital, UCLA. It's called Olive View, which is the county facility in Los Angeles. So I said, Jane, you come to the right place. Let's work together. And we published this series, Jane and my colleagues, in JAMA in September of 2023. It's a little over 2 years ago. 52 cases in this case series. All young, all Spanish-speaking immigrant, same as what Carla described. And I like to show this slide because I show you the 2012 chess publication. This is right from Israel. Remember the first case, I'm sorry, I misspoke. First case was actually 1997. Then, it goes up to 2010, and then the researchers published Mordecai Kramer, pulmonary doc there, 25 cases. And then these are our cases from the JAMA publication in 2023. And it looks, to me, it's like looks the same. The epidemic curve looks the same. By November of 2025, Jennifer Flattery, who sent me that email in 2019, Jennifer has published the results of our surveillance and epidemiology. And I think by this time, there are, 250 cases, are in this case series in JAMA. That's the medical journal to outreach to primary care docs, right? And we put it in here because we, American Journal of Public Health Journal. JAMA was the primary care. That was the get the word out to the doctors. This is get the word out to the public health community. So now, fast forward another 2 years since JAMA, and you saw this slide earlier. This is actually should be 481 as of today. Didn't have time to insert a new slide. So we're going to be over 500 cases within the next month. And we have 27 deaths now. We have about that same number waiting for a lung transplant. We've had everywhere we go and test and screen, it looks like those x-rays that Carla, you showed. So we passed an emergency rule in California to clamp down on these shops. So you have to cut everything wet. You have to put it in an enclosed area. You have to wear powered air purifying respirators, a much higher level of respiratory protection. And as my colleague Alia is going to describe to you, you have to do CT scans if you're exposed for more than 30 days, because it's, as you'll hear, a more sensitive test for diagnosis of silicosis. We've inspected about another 100 shops in the last year, our OSHA program. And we're now in the process of compiling the data about what these shops look like in 2025. But qualitatively, I've heard that they're really no better than they were in 2019. That it's really hard for these small fabrication shops to comply with the 2016 federal and now every state silica standard action limit of 25, PEL of 50. It's just realistically, it takes millions of dollars to get this done. And these shops are not equipped to do it. So what happened in Australia in 2024 is that after going through this process, they have about 600 or 700 cases in Australia. Same deal that we've had in California and that you may be facing here in Utah or the rest of the country. Australia decided enforcement and certification was not going to be the answer, that we cannot enforce our way or educate our way out of this problem. That's what my Australian colleagues concluded. They had a multi-year process of stakeholder involvement, manufacturers, fabricators, scientists, public health officials. And they decided in July of 2024 to prohibit the importation and sale of engineered stone containing more than 1% silica. Now they can do that in Australia, right? Because they're a continent. And you can, at the port of entry, when these slabs get imported, they are checking to see if any silica, crystalline silica containing engineered stone is coming in. So as Kurt mentioned, I went to Australia in November and I looked to see how's this working out in Australia. And here's a picture of the Home Depot equivalent in Australia. It's called Bunnings. Now, everybody ever been to Australia? Okay, it's there. It looks just like Home Depot, and they have Bunnings all over the country. And that's what Bunnings look like. It says choose your bench top. They call them bench tops there, bench tops, not countertops, but same thing. And there's all these other products in many varieties and different patterns and styles. But you won't find crystalline containing artificial stone there. What you'll find is amorphous. And we got an introduction on the very first slide of the difference between crystalline and amorphous stone. So these are amorphous products that are being sold at the same price with no loss of jobs. And Australia, everybody I talked to honestly has said to me, we're over it. We're moving on. We're now looking at psychosocial stress as an occupational health issue. Everybody from my Uber driver to the Bunnings salesman to the high-end countertop store to the fabrication shop owners seem to be fine, honestly. And they're still fabricating silica products. They're still using marble and granite in those shops, and they're using engineering controls. But instead of having this crystalline silica artificial stone, they're using amorphous silica. So on December 12, 2025, the Western Occupational and Environmental Medical Association, WOMA, which includes 7 states, including Utah, wrote a petition to our regulatory board, our OSHA regulatory board, asking them to start a process to consider rulemaking, amending our silica standard that would prohibit the fabrication of artificial stone containing more than 1% crystalline silica. Same definition that the Australians used. We're going to have hearings once a month for the next several months. Our board has up until May to accept or reject this petition. If they reject the petition, they will basically be saying that we think that we can regulate and enforce our way out of this problem, that we just need to have more inspectors, more education, and that we're going to be able to control silica exposures. That they're going to be saying that it's the process, not the product. It's the process, the fabrication process. It's not the product that's the problem. It's the process that's the problem. So stay tuned, because I think, as Carla suggested, and this is just, again, my own personal view, is that the best way to wander our way out of this wilderness, 10,000 small fabrication shops in the United States, the best way to wander our way out of this wilderness and protect workers is to move to substitution, the hierarchy of controls. When there are feasible, safer alternatives, as an occupational health community, I think that that's what we should be promoting. So, Alia, are you there? I'm going to be passing it to you.
I am here. Thank you. Thank you for that presentation, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you virtually. And I'll just be speaking for a few minutes and pivoting here to talk about the value of imaging as it relates to screening for silicosis in artificial stone workers, and the differences between a chest X-ray and a chest CT when screening. So if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So here I want to mention that chest imaging, along with these other components, are required for the silica medical surveillance exam per OSHA. Now, federal OSHA standard has a chest X-ray, but the Cal OSHA silica standard, as we heard, was just recently updated and requires now a chest CT to those exposed to high exposure trigger tasks, which are essentially anyone who's cutting, polishing, grinding artificial stone, essentially any fabrication type of work. In addition to chest imaging, taking a detailed clinical and occupational history and exam, doing pulmonary function testing, there's also latent TB screening, because silicosis can decrease the immune system and it can increase the risk of TB, and any other test that's recommended by the physician or the clinician. And these exams are done at least once every 3 years or more frequently if the physician decides. Next slide. Thank you. So when screening for silicosis, a common imaging tool is a chest X-ray, and that's what's required in the federal OSHA standard. And in order to screen for it on a chest x-ray, it must be read by a physician who is classified as a NIOSH certified B reader. So essentially, the B reader classification certifies physicians to read these chest x-rays for pneumoconiosis, such as asbestosis and silicosis, in a standardized fashion. And as you're going to see on the next slide, and you saw in prior slides of the different images of silicosis, in the earlier forms of silicosis, you can have these opacity or these nodules or densities on the x-ray. And essentially a number is assigned based on the severity, and it ranges from 0/0 to 3/3. And 3/3 is the most profuse or most severe. And anything that is scored 1/0 or greater is deemed to be abnormal. So I just wanted to give you that background because it is unique about reading these chest x-rays. And next slide. And earlier we saw a normal chest x-ray versus silicosis. I wanted to spend a little bit more detail on that. On the left is an example of a normal chest x-ray. And to orient yourself, we have the heart in the middle, you see the ribs, and then we have the lungs, the dark areas, and then the vessels. When we compare that to the picture on the right with someone with silicosis, you see this haziness, you see these nodules and these densities throughout the lung field. So it's clearly abnormal. And then in the next slide, we're now looking at a CAT scan or CT scan, which is a more powerful imaging tool that takes multiple sliced images of the body. And if you look at the normal CT, just to orient you again, in the middle, we have the heart, and then we have the dark areas being the lungs. And then you have vessels and the airways. Compare that to the right with someone with silicosis. Immediately, that there's something going on here. There's loss of nodules throughout the lung fields, there's inflammation, and there's scarring here. And next slide. In addition to screening, imaging is also critical in assessing progression of disease. In accelerated silicosis, it can really progress quickly, especially in this worker. As an example, this is a 43-year-old man who was admitted to the hospital when he had shortness of breath, dry cough, and chest pain. And his CT here in 2017, the area that's circled shows these nodules that are essentially coming together in the upper part of the lung. And there was concern for silicosis because he had been cutting stones since the age of 17. He continued to have regular follow-up, and if you can just click next, here by early 2018, you see this is now worsening, and this has progressed to progressive massive fibrosis, the most severe stage of silicosis. And then you click next, and by late 2018, it progressed even further, and he was listed for a lung transplant. And next slide. So now, one of the questions that we have is, what should we be ordering? What should we be using? Chest x-rays, chest CT scans? I wanted to pull up a couple of studies here. In one study of workers with accelerated or chronic silicosis, 43% actually had a normal chest x-ray despite having disease. And another study found that chest x-rays have a lower sensitivity or are less likely to pick up early silicosis, especially in artificial stone workers. Now, if a chest x-ray happens to be done and it is abnormal, it's still meaningful. It means that, this person likely has more advanced disease and still can be used in the diagnosis. But as far as screening goes, it may miss some of those earlier forms. Okay, next slide. And this slide is really emphasizing why CT scans just happen to be more useful than chest x-rays for early silicosis detection. And really, early disease detection is critical because it allows possibly timely intervention that can protect both the worker and the co-workers. Some of these studies found that nearly 40% of workers with simple silicosis on CT scan actually had a normal chest x-ray, and that CT scans are more likely to pick up these smaller changes of early silicosis compared to chest x-ray. You can just click next there. So chest x-rays still remain useful for detecting advanced disease, but they can miss early cases. And screening with CT is critical for detecting early disease and can allow timely intervention. And the other thing to note is just because someone has a normal chest X-ray, but they do work with artificial stone and they're high risk, because of that, the clinician should be ordering a CT scan to confirm. Next slide. So low dose CT is what's recommended for screening for early detection of silicosis, especially for those who are at high risk. Any abnormal findings should prompt a referral to a pulmonologist or a lung specialist for further evaluation. This is what's recommended also by the Thoracic Society of Australia and New Zealand. The low dose, can reduce radiation exposure while still providing detailed imaging, and it aligns with our goal of early intervention. Trying to detect disease before it becomes really severe and trying to prevent further exposure. So that concludes my portion on the imaging and the importance of it, especially the use of CT in screening for early disease. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now at the point of discussion and Q&A, and I do know one of Bob's questions because Bob, you said that in California there were some arguments that there was only a problem in one geographic locale.
Yeah, I mean, I often, if I talk from here, will everybody online hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm often asked, why do we have now close to 500 cases in California, but we are not seeing those huge numbers elsewhere in the country? And I think the fact that you have found them here in Salt Lake City is one answer to that. Is that they do exist in other parts of the country. Massachusetts just reported their very first case. We've had cases from Colorado. I think they're up to close to 50 cases that they've seen at their respiratory center at National Jewish. But outreach, education, access to healthcare, particularly among the immigrant population who are doing the fabrication in Southern California. I don't know what it's like in Utah, but in California, we have a lot of underinsured or non-insured. They don't have health benefits in connection with their work. But we've had access to care through public insurance systems in California. And we have pretty good primary care clinics, and particularly in Los Angeles County. So I think, and also we have a pretty strong epidemiological tracking capability. We're using electronic health records, for example, to automatically pull diagnoses of silicosis from almost all the major health systems in California. So we don't have to rely on doctors having to fill out forms and make case reports, although it's now a reportable disease. So I think it's multiple reasons. But I think it's coming. I mean, I honestly think that these shops are probably dusty, to use that word, but they have, they're overexposed. I don't think that the fabrication shops in Salt Lake City are different from the fabrication shops in Florida, Georgia, we heard, or Massachusetts. Illinois has had several cases that they reported. I think it's just a matter of recognition and case finding. So Kurt, does that answer your question?
Yeah, and you also mentioned that there was some discussion that this was only in LA.
Oh yeah, is it coming just through the ports? Right, because we have a giant port. The port of Long Beach is one of the largest ports in the world. So we get a lot of importation of this product from all over the world coming through LA. I assume that there are trucks that run from Los Angeles to Salt Lake City and to other parts of the country, that you have warehouses that are importing and that they're then fabricated by similar shops. So I don't think it's just a Port of LA problem or a Southern California problem, because there's distribution systems. Look, if you want to buy a countertop in Salt Lake City, you're going to go to one of these stores and you're going to choose your product as a consumer. You can choose really high-end products. You can choose middle, like kind of more mass market kind of products. The chances are 60 to 70% you're going to choose an artificial stone countertop. That's what you're gonna see as a consumer. They're nice products. I mean, I'm not neither here nor there on the consumer, advantageous, but they are heat resistant, stain resistant, chip resistant, and they often come with a lifetime warranty and a very large variety of colors. You're gonna find that same variety. I guarantee if I go into Home Depot in Salt Lake City, I'm gonna find the same thing as in the Home Depot in my neighborhood. And they're gonna come from the same sources.
If people who have seen human cases, this is for Bob's request, can put the name of their state that if they've seen those online, that would be really nice in the chat. Because it helps form the argument that it's not just a California problem either. As what our discussion was earlier this morning over breakfast. Cost of a case was another issue.
Cost.
Yeah, the medical.
Yeah, I don't know if we have colleagues on the chat from California, but Dr. Fazio and some other colleagues are doing an analysis of cost because of the transplant and the medical and the lifetime medical costs. So we're developing that data. Kurt, I don't have a number, but it was a really important question to us about what the and the cost borne in California by our public insurance system. In the 52 cases published in JAMA 2 years ago, only 5% of the cases had filed for workers' compensation benefits for a variety of reasons. So almost all the cost was borne in our state by the public insurance system.
Yeah, and if you get into lung transplant and all that sort of stuff, guaranteed you're talking 6 figures. The question is 7 cumulatively based upon how long they live with disability and so forth. So you can assume that they're mostly over 7 figures. So it's a huge hit on work comp. Pivoting, looking at the pyramid, can we go one slide below this? Because I think about the slide with the, So personal protective equipment, first level. There are different respirators. We did hear the California numbers and we heard the rationale. I just want to make sure that there's no other questions on PPE related issues. And if not, let's go back to the engineering controls. A lot of great stuff on engineering controls, water methods, different ways to use water methods.
I apologize. I have to sneak out in about 5 minutes, so I'm going to go to the back.
Housekeeping and so forth. Questions on this, please.
I was actually curious if there's any movement for like automaton or like robotic.
Automation was the question.
Yeah, like using robotic equipment to remove the worker from directly having.
I'm sure somebody's working on that, but
Maybe the smaller industries.
well, there's going to be another problem, which is these things get worked in a home, which we really have covered. But there's going to be issues of home exposure, and if a spouse is carrying the hat and cleaning the hat every day, we're going to have silicosis in the women in the house. So there's an issue well beyond that one.
I'm assuming that I don't know if you could do that because the specifications are going to be super different for each like countertop or whatever it is. Like they can't just mass produce each individual piece. Well, they could, but that's not the way it works.
I think they can probably program stuff pretty easily right now.
I've seen this in a friend's house where they had this installed. They get it close at the shop. They bring it on site and then they're right there with the grinder going to town, right in the front yard or maybe in the kitchen.
Yeah, one of the industrial hygienists had that happen in his own home.
I just want to, Jenny raised her hand online. One of the comments. Jenny, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to pipe in really quick about the question about robotics. There is the introduction of some robotic arm machines in stone countertop fabrication that we've seen in the field. The challenge with that is just what one of the guests in the room mentioned, that it only gets them so far with the initial cutting and fabricating tasks. And a lot of the fine finishing work, the customization work has to be done by hand. The other barrier with that is also these robotic machines cost several $100,000, and you still end up with the discharge from the water slurry that is used while the robotic machine is operating. So one of the shops that we went to with robotic arms, they had clogged drains with like the silt from coming off the countertops. And when that dries, that becomes a fine powder that gets kicked up. So we still have the exposure. It just can be reduced because you can remove the worker while the cutting is happening for a short period of time.
Thank you very much. Other comments on the engineering controls? All right. Isolation. We didn't really talk too much about that.
Just got a comment in the chat. Is the PPE insufficient to control this for long-term manufacturing?
Okay. Tyler, I don't know if Tyler or Sean, do you want to comment on that one?
Can you say your question again, please?
Yes. So, Baba?
Yeah, just a comment in the chat box. Is the PPE insufficient to control this for long-term manufacturing?
Well, PPE is always the last line of resort. You want to go forward with that. You always want to try to reduce the amount you can, but the PPE that we're seeing out here in California, you want to keep in mind a PAPR that we're requiring is 1,000-fold factor, assigned protection factor. So essentially that reduced the amount that you're exposed to by 1,000. So as long as the PPE is maintained and equipped and well used, that is sufficient. And again, keep in mind that, like I mentioned earlier, guys just don't like to shave. So the loose fitting PAPR is always more successful as long as it's maintained, used, and according to manufacturer specifications.
If I can pile on that, there were a lot of important words there. There's a whole lot of, the person has to be using it. They can't be walking around, taking it off, eating at the workplace. You know, there's a huge amount of oversight, enforcement, and rules, and so forth, or that all those and conjunctions that you put together then fall.
Yeah, that's correct. That's what's the last line.
I was just gonna say, anecdotally, we're seeing that, we're seeing cases in people that are using PPE. So.
Yeah, did you see were they using the PPE all the way back to the beginning?
Not at the beginning of their career, but in recent past, yes.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Was there another?
Yeah, we've got Jenny online with a hand up, and then Dr. Blink with your hand up also. So let's go to Jenny and then Robert.
I'm sorry, my apologies. I should have put my hand back down. I had just raised it earlier.
Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, hold on. Let me adjust my audio. Yeah, sorry about that. Oh, come on.
Robert, you've got some audio problems, so apologies. We're going to skip you if you want to put your comment in the chat. I'll read it out loud.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Much better.
Yeah.
Robert, go ahead. Gotcha.
Yeah, I've been fighting with my audio here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so just briefly, I put it in the chat, but you know, I came aboard thinking we could regulate this and participated in the new regulations to convince Cal OSHA to go forward, which is way better than what we had. The problem is this is inherently toxic material. And just looking at how toxic it is, if we've had 500 cases and estimated 4,000 California fabrication workers, that's a 12.5% incidence. If it takes, say, 10 years to develop, that's about 1.25% per year for these 4,000 cases. That's 50 new cases per year, about one a week. Even if that crude calculation is off by a factor of 10, that's a new case every 10 weeks. Even if we're off by 100, it's a new case every 2 years. You generally prohibit risks in occupational medicine and in public health more than 1 in a million people exposed. So why is 1 every 2 years being given this deadly, incurable disease Why is this okay? This is why I'm convinced that it does need to be prohibited. And every week or every month or whatever number you choose that we delay is consigning one new worker to a horrible death. So I think it's really important we focus on that timeline and the death clock that's ticking.
And we're up on the green bar, substitution. And on that, what we should also note is that product-wise, the amorphous, according to Bob, the amorphous was costing the same as the crystal. And so you have basically the same product, same quality. But if you include the medical and the CT scans and all that sort of stuff, obviously then it would be cheaper to go the amorphous route. So we've now gone up the pyramid in the substitution elimination side. I saved that for last because I knew that could be a little on the more controversial, edgier side. Melissa.
I'm interested in what workers' compensation insurance is doing on this. You're talking about a very deadly substance. And if you know in your report in your workers' comp insurance that this is the material that your employees are working and they're going to have 12% chance of having a 7-figure medical claim, what's their premiums? I'd imagine it'd be out of, yeah, exactly, uninsurable, right? So wouldn't in that state without litigation kind of push these businesses out of using this material?
Tyler, can you comment on that? I don't know if you can hear me.
I don't deal with that side as much as I do with in the field, but I do know how we're dealing with it now is like the checklist that I provided. So the policyholders that we already have, we're trying to make them less likely to develop such things as silicosis with having wet methods, which having proper protective equipment. But for new policyholders that we go on, we're taking a more detailed look at them to make sure that they meet our requirements. And we're with state funds, so we can't just reject. We're kind of an insurance of last resort, so we can't reject people just outright for something.
Yeah, and WCF Insurance has told me they have yet to see the claims. So the information of how to make a workers' compensation claim has not gotten translated into Spanish. Question.
Yeah, what I've seen, this is about 15 years old. 15 years old from a project I was involved in. And there's a lot of detail with it, but ultimately what happened, workers were dying from lung-related diseases working in a plant that had a high silica level. The problem is they were dying after they retired. So the company has no accountability to apply workers' comp. The workers weren't applying workers' comp. This is in Canada, by the way. And so we identified around 30 cases where people had died from workplace exposure, but it was never specifically because there's no requirement. Once you retire, there's no reporting requirement.
No,
so there's an issue with the system.
Another relevant comment from Dr. Blink online is that in California, at least, a majority of the affected workers are said to be undocumented. And many of the shops they're working for don't have insurance. So
there you go. Comment.
My comment is going to come from the fabrication side of things. And I've been in the stone industry for 30 years. And I've seen it evolve from hot glue gun and stick templates to where everything is digital. Our shop is very automated. I've invested $3.5 million in the last year to automate our shop, primarily to make it safer for the employees that we have. We have no, in the geographical area where I live, we have no immigrant workers, just because that's not where they seem to come. We live in Montana, and it's more just native Montanans. You'll never in the countertop industry completely robotize anything. There's always going to be a human element. There's never going to be a machine that installs it, and then there's never going to be a machine that touches it for the last time before it goes to the customer. So what we have to do is figure out how to mitigate and to protect those to the best of our ability. What I have seen in my career is that even when you have the best of intentions, there's still going to be risks involved. There's still going to be the worker that decides, and I raise my hand with this, it's going to take too long to put that mask on. I'm just going to cut this real quick and be done with it. I will say that we've gotten extremely better at not having to cut pieces in the field and do it in the shop, but it is not 100% and probably never ever will be. I have no heartache if quartz countertops were eliminated. That doesn't make, I don't make any more money fabricating a quartz countertop than I do a granite countertop. And in fact, the fallacy is that sometimes this engineered material is cheaper, and it is, but you can spend just as much money on an engineered product as you can on a natural stone product. And so if quartz was eliminated today and it was across the board that way industry-wide, it wouldn't change the fact that countertops are still going to be, people are still wanting countertops. We'll make them out of granite. We'll make them out of quartzite. We'll make them out of marble. We'll make them out of porcelain. It's just right now, the design trends are being pushed by quartz because they can manipulate the colors and make the colors do whatever they want them to do. And in a man-made thing, they always ask me, how come it's this way? And I say, well, then you better ask God, because he made that piece. It wasn't somebody in a factory. And so I think sometimes it's really easy in a setting like this to say, well, this is what we need to do. And it's really not that simple. But employers have to step up and have to do what we can to protect ourselves and our employees. But then you balance that with the fact that you're providing good paying jobs for guys that have families and houses and cars, and to eliminate that segment of industry, it's not going away. People are still going to always have countertops. And inherently, there's something in everything that's made. I guarantee there's glue in this laminate that would kill you if you breathed it. And so we have to do the best that we can. I do like the suggestions that have been made, and it's opened my eyes to some things that I can see that we can do differently in our shop to make things better for our employees and for those that are around us.
I love countertops, don't get me wrong. You already know that, but as we talked beforehand, you had
I think she was
okay.
actually.
Two last
I'll
comments.
be super brief. I think that what we're seeing in Utah, we still just have this lag, right? I really believe it's this uptick in engineered stone, and we just don't have the case count yet that's being reported in the workers' comp system that to push the financial element, to push the workers' comp insurances to push back on their insureds to either increase insurance costs or whatnot. And I'm really grateful you spoke up. This dialogue is very important to have employers connected with regulators, connected with medical folks.
I have never had a workman's comp person ever ask about silica.
Interesting.
It's always, how are you going to keep people from hurting their backs, cutting their fingers, poking their eyes out? It has never come up one time.
Crazy.
Because those are what the most claims are the physical injuries that you can see, not the ones you can't.
Absolutely.
I think I hear change coming. One last comment.
Is there a quick explanation for, well, two parts? Do silicous fibers that enter the lungs, do they migrate or do they rapidly attach? And then the second part of that is how long typically after for that scar tissue and cancer to develop?
So we're seeing a couple of things. One, they don't migrate outside of the lungs. I guess in a situation where you have massive
Well, I meant migrate within
exposure.
the alveoli and the bronchial area.
So that's kind of a terminal place, like the alveolus is like the end of the lung, so to speak. So once you have this respirable dust hit the alveolar, that's where it ends. That's where it stops. It doesn't exit the lungs necessarily. Sometimes there is some exit of
some movement though within. Is what
it doesn't really move. It just goes. It just pushes the physical dynamics, the physics dynamics of.
That's what's thought to be the case.
Aeration is thought that it ends up in that portion of the lungs. But your question with regards to how long does it develop? We always thought silicosis takes 10, 20 years to develop, but
these cases that we're seeing, this aggressive silicosis, as Bob mentioned, that is acting differently. We're seeing cases of people with 5 years of exposure, and we're talking high levels of exposure that are developing this aggressive silicosis much more quickly than we've seen in past, where exposures may have been less. Or anyway, there are dynamics at play now that are producing these symptoms and these diagnoses in patients in a much more quick time frame than you would normally consider a classic or a chronic silicosis from what we would consider a chronic exposure.
Joel's response. Okay, well, one last comment.
That's what I said.
So I just want to make a shameless plug. If you have an employer that's having issues with this, come and talk to Consultation for Utah Occupational Safety and Health. I worked with an employer for 2 years to tweak their system to the point where we finally got them under the action level. It took a lot of money on their part, and we took it. It was like 3 or 4 different go back and resample on our part, but there's help available. You just have to ask.
I appreciate that, and there's also help usually from the insurers and from consultants, IH and safety. So thank you for all of our speakers and your time, your effort, and reach out. We're happy to help. We do want to help. Thank you very much.